day, Ma'am Gimbao, and for today, I will be discussing about the subject, its position, its structure and definition, and most importantly, its agreement. So, what is the subject? So, in simple words, the subject is the argument that first, it comes before the verb. The second one, it sits on the left side of the sentence. And the third one is, it is an immediate part of the sentence structure. So it is not inside the verb phrase. Alright, so for today, I have here an example. So this is the structural difference or the T diagram of the subject. So we have an example here. Gary gave Victor a radio. So it is based on the example from the book. So as we can see here on the diagram, so this is the subject and this is the entire verb phrase. So what is the subject? Gary. And what is the verb? Gave. And the entire verb phrase is Victor gave Victor a radio. So here, based on the definition that I mentioned earlier, this is the argument that is seated on the left side, which is the subject, and it is outside of the verb phrase. Now that we know that the subject comes before the verb, and we all know that the subject is outside the phrase, here is the biggest question. Could we freely move the subject itself? The answer is no. So this subject, the argument, is something that you cannot move freely. So I have here the example once again. So Gary gave Victor a radio is correct because the subject Gary is before the verb. And gave Victor a radio is not. It is wrong because the subject before verb. And same as the two examples here. They do not follow the proper structure of where we should place the verb and the subject itself. Okay, so for the last one is we have the subject and verb agreement. So this is one of the example. So in a finite sentence, so the verb may change its form depending on the subject. So for the example here, so the verb form changes when the person or the number is third person singular. Like Ernie eats an apple. We cannot say that Ernie eat an apple because it doesn't match the subject and the verb form. So that is called agreement. So other arguments have no effect on the verb form. So this is the agreement of the subject and the verb. And that's all from my part, and the rest of my members would be discussing the following functions of the subject. And thank you, ma'am, for listening.
My name is Ella, and I will be continuing where my classmate left off. We have already seen what the subject is and how it triggers agreement. Now, I will be covering the remaining grammatical properties of the subject. Specifically, case, the rule that the subject must always be present, expletive or dummy subjects, and non-finite clause subject. So, let's begin. The next grammatical property of the subject is case. In English, this is visible only on pronouns. The subject of a finite clause that is a clause with a tense verb must use the nominative form of the pronoun. So we say, I will consider the problem, not me will consider the problem. Compare example 43a through 43d in the book. And the pronouns are in subject position, so they take nominative form. I, he, she, we, they. But in all other positions as a complement of the verb, complement of a preposition or subject of a non-finite clause, they switch to accusative me, him, her, us, them. So, case is a strong grammatical signal that tells us where the subject is. Here is a fascinating grammatical rule. The subject of a finite clause must always be there even when it has no real meaning. Look at example 44. It seems that Roger ran away. The verb seem only needs one argument. The clause that Roger ran away, semantically, there is no subject needed, yet English still requires a subject in that position, so we use the pronoun it as a placeholder. This it does not refer to any real thing. It is just there to satisfy the grammatical rule that every finite clause must have a subject. Moving on, these meaningless subjects have a special name. They are called expletive or pleonastic subjects. Both words simply mean unnecessary or without meaning. It is very important to distinguish this dummy it from the real it. In example 45, it beat me. That it refers to something real like a nuke. You can ask what beat you and get an answer. But in example 44, if you ask what seems that Roger ran away, there is no answer. The pronoun does not refer to anything. The book also points out that expletives are restricted to the subject position only. You cannot put them in complement positions as examples 48 and 48b. So, Sam smiled it and Sue sat it are both ungrammatical. The last grammatical property I will cover is the subject of non-finite clauses. These are more complex. There are two cases. In the first case, example 49, the situation is just like a finite clause. The expletive subject must be present. If you remove it, the sentence becomes ungrammatical. In the second case, example 50, the subject must be completely absent. Terry tried to escape is correct, but Terry tried himself to escape is wrong. However, and this is the interesting part, even though the subject is absent, we still understand that Terry is the one doing the escaping. The meaning is there, but the grammatical subject is not. The book concludes by saying that subjects are treated quite differently from other arguments from a grammatical point of view, and that is exactly what we have seen in this section. So, to summarize what I have covered, first, the subject of a finite clause must use nominative pronouns because of case. Second, every finite clause must have a subject even if that subject is an empty, meaningless it called an expletive. Third, expletives can only appear in subject position. And finally, non-finite clause. Subjects can be either obligatorily present or obligatorily absent, depending on the structure of a sentence. That's all, thank you, and we'll now pass it to Trixie who will explore the semantic side of the subject.
Good day everyone, I am Trixie May, and for my part, I will be discussing the semantic or the meaning side of the subject. So, the subject on semantic side. So first, we will going to discuss the traditional view of what is the sentence is all about. Traditionally, subject names is what the sentence is all about, and the predicate says something about the subject. For example, Simon ate the sandwich. Simon here is the subject, and then ate the sandwich is our predicate that says something about the sandwich. But the traditional views are being rejected and said that it is highly problematic by the book, and they provided a three arguments to say why they are against it. For the first problem, they said expletive subject it can mean nothing. And then we also have the problem number 2, where they give us an sentence that says, as for your claim that you are Superman, I don't believe it. So here, I is our subject, but the sentence is not about me. but rather it is about the dubious claim. And then, what's up with Amanda? This is a question, and someone answered, the teacher just failed her. In this sentence, the teacher is the subject, but the sentence is all about Amanda. This is why the book rejected and did not adopt the traditional claim, because this is the subject, but it is not the sentence is all about. And then let's move on to the next part, which is the thematic roles of the subject. The subject has a specific argument of verb. If you have two or more arguments in a sentence, it is not interpreted randomly. For example, here, Henry hit Thomas. Henry here is our agent and Thomas is our patient because he was the one being hit by the doer or the agent. Here, you cannot interchange their argument or else you'll create another meaning of the sentence. And then the next one is the Simon sends a problem. Simon here is the experiencer because he was the one who sends a problem. And to move forward, patient and theme subject. Do you know that the subject is not always an agent? So here is an example. The letter arrived late. So here, letter is our subject, however, this is not an agent but rather a theme. And then the next subject, the next example, a problem was sent. A problem here is our subject, but this is not an agent, but also this is a patient. This is his argument. Because as what I've said, subject is not always an agent. And then the next part, we have the complex cases. In complex cases, you can have the same argument and a subject or not, because it depends on the verb. For example, here, Fred fears heights. So Fred fears heights. Here, Fred is our experiencer and also our subject. However, in this example, height frightened friend. Fred is also our experiencer, but he is not the subject because of the placement of the verbs, right? And then to the last part, other types of subject. So a subject does not always have to be noun phrase or a DP. For example, this one, down there would be a good place to hide. This is not a noun phrase or a DP, but this is a PP. And then prepositional phrase subject. And then we have that I don't know, the answer should not be surprising. This is also not a noun phrase or a DP, but this is a clause subject phrase. And then the next word, the third one will be ill was how I was feeling at that time. This is also not a noun phrase or a DP, but this is a AP subject. And lastly, run away is what I advise you to do. This is also a noun phrase or a DP, but rather a VP subject.